If the knowledge argument is successful in establishing dualism and establishing that physicalism is false, we might want to know why. Why is it that the premises are true? Why is it that one can know all the physical facts about a bat and yet not know what it's like to have sonar experiences, know what it's all the physical facts about color vision, but not know what it's like to have color vision experiences? And so we can look at the distinction between objective and subjective to help us out. This distinction will help us understand why the knowledge argument, why its premises are true, and help us formulate a slightly more general argument for dualism. So what's an objective fact? Well, an objective fact might be something like the Earth is spherical, the Moon orbits the Earth, humans are organisms, the Dodgers won the World Series in 2020, or I am wearing pants. I am, by the way. So what makes all those facts objective? Well, they are how they are because of how the world is independently of our reactions to it. So the shape of the moon is, we can correctly perceive it, we can react to it, but it's not circular because of how we react to it. It looks circular because it is circular. The moon orbits the Earth. That's not about what we think or believe or feel about the moon and the Earth. It's about the moon and the Earth. And the Dodgers won the World Series. That's about what happened, not about how I feel about it, what I happen to know about it. Those are facts that don't depend upon our reactions to the subject matter, right? All of these things, we can learn them, we can know them, but they are the way they are not because of our reactions to them. Rather, we react to them insofar as we do because of how they are. At least that's what you would think if you thought they were objective. You might think, no, they're not objective, and if you did think they weren't objective, then you'd be saying that somehow these facts somehow depend upon us. I think they are objective, and I think they don't depend upon how we think or feel about these different subject matters. What would a subjective fact be? It's a little bit strange to talk about subjective facts because we tend to think that facts are objective, but we'll put facts in quotes and not worry too much about this terminology. So cilantro is good. Well, really what that means is I enjoy cilantro. So there's not some sort of independent fact about cilantro out there. There's just the fact of what is it like for me when I eat it, and I enjoy it. Billie Eilish is better than Doja Cat. Those are both musical artists. Well, that might actually be about what people's reactions to their music. So maybe most people enjoy Billie Eilish more than Doja Cat, or at least that's when we say Billie Eilish is better than Doja Cat. What we really mean, what will really make that true, is that in fact most people enjoy Billie Eilish more than Doja Cat. Maybe they don't, right? I don't know, whatever. But the point is that what it is for Billie Eilish to be better than Doja Cat is really just, it's about how people react to the two of them. That was funny. Well, that's really about my reactions to it. I found it amusing. It amused me. Killing is wrong in general. Well, if you were a moral relativist, you would think that what that really means is I disapprove of killing or we disapprove of killing. The ethical theories we looked at earlier in the class are not moral relativist theories. So they would say, no, killing is wrong because of the decrease in utility, or killing is wrong because of it disrespects autonomy. And in those ways, for them, killing is wrong wouldn't be a subjective fact. But if you thought what it means for killing to be wrong is that I disapprove of killing, then you would think that insofar as it's a fact that killing is wrong, it's a subjective fact. So subjective facts are how they are partially because of how we react to the world, and are not independent of our reactions. So is it pleasant or not for me or for us? Does it look blue to me or to us? Do I or we approve of it? Those are what makes subjective facts subjective. So science tries to discover more objective facts and properties. So for example, we might think initially when we first encounter the world, thousands of years ago, humans think in terms of light and heavy. And what is it for something to be heavy? Well, it's hard to pick up. It's hard for us to move it. Light is, it's easy for us to move it. That's relatively subjective because it's about whether or not something is heavy or light depends upon how we relate to it. Whereas the notion of mass and physics doesn't have anything in particular to do with us. Or what about hard and soft? Well, we might initially classify things as hard and soft in terms of how easy, say, the effect they have on our skin, and what it feels like when we touch them, versus how hard are they. Is it how difficult is it for how easily can a diamond scratch them? Or the notion of electrical charge isn't something, there's not even any clearly sort of simple, intuitive notion that corresponds to that. That's just a notion that was discovered by science in its exploration of the world. And in science's exploration of the world, then, we see science moving away from the categories that ways of thinking about the world in terms of how things look to us, how things feel to us, how things sound to us, what sorts of things we can make happen to the world, and characterizing the world in terms that have less to do with our interactions and our ability to perceive and act on the world. So our knowledge of water, for example, well, initially, pre-scientifically, would be what does it look like to us, where do we find it, and so on. Post-scientifically, it's in terms of water would be characterized in terms of its fundamental physical parts, independently of how it looks to us or feels to us or what have you. Or knowledge of heat, pre-scientifically, when we think about heat, we're thinking about at least in part, what feels hot or cold to the touch. There are other aspects to pre-scientific knowledge of heat, but a central element would be our knowledge of what it feels like, or characterizing in terms of, is something hot or not? Well, what does it feel like? Once the scientific revolution gets developed, we actually have the notion of heat. There are different notions, it turns out. There's a notion of mean molecular kinetic energy, which is how quickly the different molecules in an object are vibrating. And we ask, well, what is the average of that vibrational speed? Or we might ask instead, just in general, sort of what is the total molecular kinetic energy? And we don't need to understand this example in much detail. The point is just that when we think, the initial notion of heat has to do with how things feel, and it turns out that notion is a little bit problematic. And as science advances, we discover, there are these different ways of thinking about what we call kinetic energy, and those are different aspects of heat, and they don't have much to do, in terms of their definitions, with how things feel. So what does this objective-subjective distinction have to do with the knowledge argument? Well, when we look at the knowledge argument, we start with these two examples that are then supposed to from which we can try to argue the dualism. And the example is suggested there's a sort of knowledge gap, right? You can know all the physical facts, and that doesn't, in and of itself, doesn't provide you with knowledge of the mental facts. So there's a knowledge gap. There's a gap between knowing the physical facts and knowing the mental facts. And we might ask, well, why is there this knowledge gap, right? If indeed there is, some people don't think that there is a knowledge gap. They reject this description of Nagel and Jackson's descriptions of their thought experiments, and they don't agree with the knowledge argument. But let's suppose we did, we might want to know, why is it that you can know all the physical facts and yet not know the mental facts? And you could just say, well, because they're different. But you might want a deeper explanation than that, and that's where this objective-subjective distinction can help us. So when Nagel has this following quote about experience. He says, the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means that there is something that is like to be that organism, something it is like for the organism. We may call this the subjective character of experience. When we're talking about mental states, part of what we're talking about is what is it like for the perceiver, for the subject of the experience, to be in that mental state? What is the quality of that like for the experiencer? What's the subjective quality of it? And so you might think experience has an essentially subjective element. But physical phenomena are more objective. They're less viewpoint dependent. They're less subjective. They're not about how physical phenomena do not involve how the world seems to a perceiver. They involve how the world is independently of how it's perceived. And so when we talk about physical stuff on the one hand and the physical properties and particles and so on the one hand, and experience on the other hand, we're talking about fundamentally different kinds of things, because the physical stuff, that's how things are independent of perceivers. But when we're talking about mentality, we're talking about, in part, the subjective character of the experience, what it is like for a perceiver. And so the physical realm is just entirely the wrong kind of thing to think, that's mentality. That's the way Nagel and Jackson would think about it. There's a knowledge gap because the mental qualities are subjective and the physical qualities are objective. They're two totally different kinds of things. And so if we believe that experience really does have this essentially subjective element, which is what the thought experiments, the bad experiment and the Mary experiment, are trying to draw out, then we should be very skeptical of physicalism, because physicalism says, hey, mental states can be understood in purely objective terms, and what the two thought experiments suggest is that that's not true.